Welcome to The Author Show, where we present new authors and books. From fiction to self-help and everything in between, you'll find it all here. To watch the TV version of our program, visit authorswebtv.com. That's authorswebtv.com. And now, let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming to the program author Virginia Frusteri Sollars, and she is the author of And Some Will Triumph. Virginia was raised in Brooklyn, New York, and became a registered nurse in 1980, working as a psychiatric nurse for most of her career. She worked in the jail system for 26 years, caring for and treating the mentally ill. Virginia, how are you?
I'm fine. Happy to be on your show.
Let's start with a big question. Tell us about your book, please.
Yes, my book, And Some Will Triumph, though characterized as fiction, is based on real people and their crimes. It relates the journey of Elizabeth, a compassionate psychiatric nurse who comes to California from New York with her teenage daughter to work at the fictional Raine Correctional Facility. Elizabeth finds herself interacting with some of society's most troubled and challenging inmates, and shows how she must at times fight the system to give the best care to her patients. Elizabeth tells the stories of both the psychiatric inmates as well as the nurses who have problems in their lives as well. Since the book is based on my professional experience, it is an insider's look into the minds of psychiatric inmates, revealing their secrets, regrets, frustrations, and hopes, and how they cope with their life in jail. But my book is more than the story. It explains the many mental health disorders, points out the broken mental health system, and describes the reasons why the mentally ill are incarcerated.
So who did you write your book for specifically?
20 years old and up. Male and female will be able to relate to something in my book. And I'm finding that some parents have given it to their older teenagers who have identified with some of my characters. Anyone interested in mental health issues, families who are dealing with someone who is mentally ill, professionals thinking of psychiatry as their field, anyone curious about the jail system or wants to gain insight into the psychiatric disorders. I remember so many times nurses saying, someone should write a book about this. Then again, who would believe us? I wanted readers to understand what goes on in a correctional setting, the challenges both the mentally ill as well as the nurses face.
Now, would you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you could say runs throughout your book?
Yes. Over the years, I've seen the jail become a new institution for the mentally ill, which would also encompass the many homeless who are transient due to mental illness. I think many blind their eyes to the plight of the mentally ill. If they read about them, it's usually statistical information that doesn't mean anything to them. My book shows them as real people who have to depend on a society that sometimes wishes they could just disappear. My message, they are real, they are here to stay, so how can we help?
So if you had to choose, what would you say is the single most important idea you're sharing in your book that's really going to add value to the reader's life?
I wanted to change people's thought process about the mentally ill from, oh, he's just crazy, to being more mindful that these people are dealing at times with voices in their head or experiencing paranoia or depression so deep that they can't function. Hopefully my book will make someone recognize that their child, wife, or husband is having problems mentally and get them help before something happens to them or to someone else that may change their life and maybe they'll end up in jail. It may alter their life forever.
Now, if you could compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
I am going to go with a show. I am going to go with Criminal Minds, as I take the readers into the minds of the mentally ill, what they're thinking, the voices they are listening to, the delusions they are having, and the reasons why they committed a crime.
Why do you prefer to write in this genre?
Well, it gave me a lot of leeway, so I could basically tell the real stories, the real crimes, and not go to court. So that was my basic reason for writing it this way, gave me some leeway in presenting the events. I didn't have to worry about going to court.
What inspired you to write this book?
My 36 years of being a psychiatric nurse, 26 of them in a large jail system. Most books about crimes and inmates or prisoners, they write about one event, and the whole book seems to center around that. I wanted to give my readers a broader spectrum. My book is character-based, so readers will meet Chris, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and wears newspapers on his head to stop the aliens from reading his thoughts. April, who is so depressed, she loses sight of reality. She becomes psychotic, doesn't know what's real, and begins hearing voices herself, and ends up killing her children because she thought she was saving them. James, who suffers from erotomania and stalks a woman who is famous, believing that she is in love with him. Annette, who suffers from obsessive-compulsive disorder, and we finally learn what she means by the numbers 629. Joy, a teenager whose parents left her in the care of her older brother. He prostitutes her out since the age of 10 and starts her on heroin. She ends up in jail due to drugs, but never really had a chance. And Jamie, who's developmentally disabled and always had a difficult time with other inmates taking advantage of her. And I also relate the stories of some of the deputies and some of the nurses also.
So in your experience, how is working in corrections different than working in a psychiatric hospital?
In a hospital, everything revolves around the patients or clients. In the jail, you have to work around the correctional system and their timeline. Inmates need to be housed within 24 hours from arrival, which presents a problem for the mentally ill. In the facility I worked in, and I'm sure it's this way in most jails, we did not have sufficient beds for them, as most of them needed to be housed separately. So we ended up playing musical chairs, sending an inmate out of the psychiatric unit who wasn't ready to interact with others, and he would end up in regular housing in order to provide a bed for someone more acutely mentally ill. And if the bed was needed during the night shift, you couldn't move someone who was going to court the next day. They would need 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Mentally ill females were mostly housed in regular housing, as we only had 16 beds in the medical unit for both the mentally ill and medical inmates. You have to deal with deputies who don't understand the mentally ill and lieutenants and sergeants who just want them fixed and quickly. Everything in the jail works on a schedule that the mentally ill can't always adhere to.
What challenges do the mentally ill face in corrections?
So many. They're locked down for most of their day if they're in a single cell. And a lot of times they're in safety gowns and in safety cells when they act out. It's so hard for them because they're contained in a cell, and most of them shouldn't be in the jail to start out with. And a lot of them don't take medication, so they're locked down for so many hours in one little cell.
So in your opinion, in what way does the system fail?
Across the country, we don't have the facilities to house or heal the mentally ill. We need to educate the people who have the means to make the changes. In Orange County, California, which is where I am, which holds a population of over 3 million, we have 10 beds for acute psychiatric patients with no insurance. And that facility does not take medically ill people or the elderly. So now you have a police officer dealing with a mentally ill person in the field. Is he going to bring that person to a facility that is always out of bed and always asks for medical clearance, which means he would have to sit in an ER room for hours and sometimes days? Or is he going to bring them to the jail where we have to take them even if the charges are bogus or minor? But it's not only here that there's a problem, it's across the United States, since there are no institutions anymore for the mentally ill. I remember when they closed the institutions back east, how chaotic that was. People who have never done anything for themselves were now supposed to be able to care for themselves. They did set up halfway houses, but most of them got lost, both in the system and in the streets. I think if not institutions, then at least there should be government-funded psychiatric emergency facilities that can accommodate a large population. Also, if I can continue, I think that all law enforcement should be better versed on mental illness. They should be given courses that are mandatory and not learn how to deal with them on the job. Most careers have in-services, and police have to show that they can shoot, sometimes on a monthly basis, yet some police officers here are only required to take a 3-hour course, and that's for the term of their whole career. There are psychiatric teams that do come out to assist, but some work banker's hours and others just take too long to get there. A lot of situations could be handled better for the mentally ill clients. For the most part, they don't need to be in jail.
So why did you have your main character in the book being stalked by a serial killer?
I based this on a stalker that I once had. It was devastating losing control over my life. Horrible to be considered prey to someone. I wanted people to realize that this can happen to anyone, that these predators are out there, and though you should live your life, you should always be vigilant, especially with your children. I cringe sometimes seeing how public people make their lives now between Facebook and tweeting, especially teenagers. Predators can become familiar with their lives so easily. I just wanted to remind my readers of that.
So how would you describe the writing style you're using?
Mostly narrative and descriptive. Elizabeth, the psychiatric nurse of my main character, relates the stories of the psychiatric inmates, and the psychiatric inmates also tell their stories themselves. And my book follows the stories of various mentally ill clients as well as the nurses over a period of time. And it gives insight into the various mental illnesses as well as the correctional system.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
Anyone interested in mental health, anyone who's interested in corrections, anyone who wants to gain insight of what the mentally ill are dealing with. Anyone who's had a person in their life who's had a psychiatric problem.
Do you have a website?
I do. It's www.virginiasollars, spelled S as in Sam, O-L-L-A-R-S as in Sam.com. And I would love to hear from anyone listening to this radio show about the problems they've had or any interest they have in mental illness. I am so well versed on the subject.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Virginia Frusteri Sollars, and she is the author of And Some Will Triumph. Virginia, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Please share this interview with your family and friends so that they too may have the opportunity to discover our guest and her work. And why not spread the word on social media? We look forward to you joining us next time for another great book and another great author on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. To contact us, call toll-free 1-877-955-8800. That's 877-55-8800. Or visit theauthorshow.com, theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.